The morning started like any other, calm, predictable, wrapped in the soft hum of sprinklers and the faint chatter of early risers heading out for work. The neighborhood, known for its rows of beige houses and manicured lawns, prided itself on order. Every mailbox was the same height, every hedge was the same shape. Even the trash bins, labeled and aligned with geometric precision, seemed to embody the homeowners association's obsession with control. For years, this quiet perfection had gone unchallenged. Residents followed the rules, paid their dues, and nodded politely when board members drove by on golf carts, inspecting the streets like silent sentinels. But that peace was about to crack. At the center of it all was a truck. Not just any truck, but one that gleamed under the sunlight like a badge of individuality. Its deep navy blue paint shimmered, freshly waxed, reflecting the sky and trees like glass. It wasn't brand new, but it had character, the kind of character that stood out in a place built to blend in. To its owner, the truck wasn't merely a vehicle, it was a piece of life. It carried memories of long drives, hard work, and weekends spent fixing and polishing. It wasn't parked to provoke anyone. It simply belonged there, as much as any car on the street. But in neighborhoods ruled by uniformity, belonging isn't about what fits your life. It's about what fits their standards. One morning, a piece of paper fluttered beneath the truck's windshield wiper, stark white against the navy blue like a challenge dressed as civility. The notice came from the HOA board. The words were concise, polite, and cold. The truck, it claimed, violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. It was oversized, unsightly, and not in harmony with the neighborhood's visual character. There were no complaints attached, at least not officially, but everyone knew who had started it. The HOA president lived 3 doors down. She was the kind of person who watched the street as if it were her private domain, scanning for anything out of place. A misaligned garbage can, a faded welcome mat, a slightly taller mailbox. Nothing escaped her gaze. To her, the truck was an offense against the landscape she curated like an art exhibit. The owner read the notice twice, then folded it slowly, like one might fold a warning that didn't deserve to be taken seriously. But in neighborhoods like this, paper carried power. 1 notice meant scrutiny, 2 meant consequences, and 3 could mean fines that piled higher than reason itself. Still, the truck remained parked where it had always been, at the edge of the driveway facing outward, proud and unapologetic. It was a small act of quiet defiance, but in a place governed by conformity, it echoed louder than any confrontation. The owner had lived there long enough to understand how the board worked. Rules were their currency, compliance was their victory, but rebellion, even quiet rebellion, was their greatest fear. And so, he decided that if they saw the truck as a problem, then maybe it was time to become their problem. That weekend, as the sun dipped low and the air filled with the soft hum of cicadas, plans began to take shape. While others trimmed their lawns and watered their flower beds, he was in his garage, measuring, calculating, and imagining something far bigger than what the HOA could ever anticipate. The first step wasn't to hide or retreat. It was to expand. Every HOA thrives on submission, on the quiet acceptance of their power. But sometimes, the smallest act of defiance grows into a story that spreads across every mailbox, across every driveway, until the neighborhood that once enforced silence can't stop talking. By Sunday evening, the truck was spotless, standing tall beneath the streetlight. But something in its presence felt different, almost symbolic. The notice still sat folded on the dashboard, untouched, like a reminder of the spark that had started it all. The neighbors went to bed that night unaware that this was only the beginning. They thought the battle would end with another fine, another warning, another quiet removal. But they didn't yet know that the owner wasn't planning to get rid of the truck. He was planning to get a bigger one, and that decision, made in silence under the faint glow of a street lamp, would soon turn a small suburban dispute into a story the whole town would talk about. The neighborhood was about to learn what happens when control meets defiance and loses. And then one morning the sound came, deep, rumbling and unmistakable. It wasn't the hum of a sedan or the whisper of an electric car. It was a growl, powerful, unapologetic, and loud enough to make the ground tremble. Every window on the street seemed to come alive at once. Blinds tilted, curtains parted. The noise drew eyes, one by one, until every gaze settled on the driveway that had caused so much quiet uproar. The truck was gone. But in its place stood something else, larger, brighter, and more imposing than anyone could have imagined. It was a new truck, freshly polished, its chrome details flashing under the morning sun like armor. The paint gleamed in a deep, custom shade of metallic red, the kind of color that turned heads, that refused to blend into the muted tones of beige houses and white fences. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement. Word spread fast. By noon, photos had already circulated in the neighborhood group chat. Captions were laced with disbelief, annoyance, and a hint of admiration. Some called it childish, others called it genius. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was impossible to ignore. The HOA president watched from her window, her jaw tight, her morning coffee forgotten on the sill. To her, this wasn't just defiance, it was an insult to authority. The truck's presence mocked every letter she'd written, every rule she'd quoted, every ounce of power she believed she had over the neighborhood's image. By afternoon, another notice appeared, this one printed in bold official font, wrapped neatly in a plastic sleeve, taped to the owner's front door. It cited multiple sections of the community code: vehicle height, aesthetic standards, excessive noise. But it didn't matter how many clauses it listed. The truck met every legal standard. It was large, yes, but not unlawful. It was loud, but within limits. It was different, but not prohibited. The HOA had met its match, and for the first time its rules weren't enough to control the narrative. As the days passed, the truck became more than an act of rebellion. It became a landmark. Children rode their bikes past it, pointing in awe. Teenagers took photos beside it, posting them online with captions like HOA's worst nightmare. Even delivery drivers slowed down to stare. The owner kept it spotless, polishing it each weekend under the gaze of the entire street. The chrome shimmered, the tires stood proud, and the engine purred like a challenge to anyone who thought conformity was strength. But the HOA didn't give up. New letters arrived weekly, each one more desperate than the last. The board began citing vague complaints: visual clutter, community disruption, impact on property value. Behind closed doors, they held meetings filled with frustration, searching for loopholes to force compliance. But each attempt ended the same way, with the realization that the truck wasn't breaking any actual rule. It simply broke their illusion of control. The tension spilled beyond paper. Neighbors began to take sides. Some admired the defiance, finding humor in the quiet chaos. Others feared it would invite stricter regulations. Backyard conversations grew longer. Driveway whispers turned into debates. The once harmonious neighborhood was now divided between those who valued order and those who valued freedom. Every evening, the sun dipped low behind the truck's tall frame, and its shadow stretched long across the street, a reminder that one act of defiance had changed the neighborhood's rhythm forever. But with defiance came escalation. But before the chains could tighten, a floodlight snapped on from the house, bright and blinding. The driver froze. Across the street, people stepped out of their homes, phones in hand, recording. The HOA's attempt to remove the truck had just become public. By the time the last resident sat down, the room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that settles before change. The board was cornered. They couldn't pass the rule without sparking outrage. They couldn't fight the tide of collective defiance. For the first time in years, the vote didn't go their way. The proposal was rejected, overwhelmingly. Outside, the night air felt electric. People left the meeting smiling, some laughing softly as they walked past the truck, still glinting under the streetlights. It was no longer a symbol of conflict. It was victory incarnate. Neighbors started contributing ideas. One offered to design a mural for the side panel. Another donated LED lights for evening gatherings. Kids helped polish the chrome. What was once a target of HOA rage was now a source of pride for nearly everyone else. Every Saturday evening, families would gather around the truck. Music played softly, lawn chairs appeared, and conversations filled the air. Laughter echoed where arguments once lived. The truck wasn't just rebellion anymore, it was a gathering point. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The thing the HOA had tried hardest to erase had become the one thing that brought the neighborhood together. Meanwhile, the HOA board grew quiet. Their meetings shrank in attendance. Their notices went unread. The authority that once ruled through fear now carried little weight. The president still watched from her porch, clipboard in hand, but her notes went nowhere. Complaints filed into silence. The board's emails came slower, less confident, until eventually they stopped altogether. Months passed and autumn arrived. The truck remained a constant in a changing season. Leaves gathered around its tires. Children in Halloween costumes posed beside it for photos. It wasn't just accepted, it had become beloved. The homeowner had never meant to start a revolution. He simply wanted to keep something he loved. But his quiet resistance had done something bigger. It had reminded everyone what it meant to belong to a community rather than to an institution. By winter, the transformation was complete. The HOA, once feared, now existed mostly in name. Its power had been absorbed by the very people it was meant to serve. Neighbors worked together more often, deciding on improvements through group discussions instead of directives. The spirit of cooperation replaced the fear of enforcement. The truck sat proudly through the snow, its red paint standing out against the white world around it. A bold reminder that color, difference, and character weren't flaws, but beauty itself. The owner sometimes stood by the window in the evening, watching the soft glow of string lights reflected on the truck's surface. It had started as an act of defiance, but now it was peace, earned and unbreakable. As the new year approached, the neighborhood hosted its first ever Freedom BBQ, a casual gathering born from the unity that followed the conflict. Everyone came, from families with toddlers to retirees who'd lived there for decades. They grilled, shared stories, and took turns admiring the truck that started it all. Someone even joked that it deserved its own plaque. Laughter filled the street, and for the first time no one worried about rules or violations or fines. There were no arguments about decor or symmetry. There was just life, imperfect, colorful, and real. When dusk settled, the truck lights came on, glowing gently like a campfire. People gathered around it, warm and content. The owner leaned against the hood, the same place where frustration had once boiled, now replaced with quiet satisfaction. Across the street, the former HOA president stood by her window, the clipboard gone. She watched the celebration from behind the curtain, her face unreadable. The rules she'd built her power on had collapsed under the weight of something stronger: community. The red truck gleamed under the stars, its surface reflecting the laughter of those it had once divided. It had started as a protest and ended as a legacy. And in that moment, the neighborhood finally understood what beauty really meant. It wasn't sameness, it wasn't compliance. It was pride, individuality, and the courage to stand tall, even when told you didn't belong. The HOA had tried to silence one man's choice, but instead they had given the neighborhood a voice. And as the lights dimmed and the last car pulled away, the truck stood quietly at the heart of the street. No longer a challenge, no longer a threat, but a reminder. Sometimes it takes something ugly to show what true beauty really is.